Here I am, here at Drum Channel, with another masked man. See if you can tell who this is. I'll give you a hint. Let's look at your hand position when you're holding the sticks. Well, it's got to be Virgil Donati. There's no question about it. Hey, there you are. Okay.
No, isn't this, remarkable from one year to another? Last time I saw you in this very room was just over a year ago, when I was preparing for the Ruination US tour.
That's right.
And we were building a rack for that.
And you were all ready to go.
It's been over a year, and who was to predict what would happen in the space of that year, except for my actual record Ruination, which predicted it over a year ago.
Tell me more about that. Wait a minute. Forgot about that.
Well, the theme of Ruination is pretty much about the world we're living in right now.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, there was a photograph from Minneapolis which I was sent, which depicted very, very precisely the front cover of the record. I mean, it was like a prophecy. And if you read the lyrics of the title track and a few of the other tracks, it really kind of bears some truth now to what's happened in that short space of time. So I can probably claim that it was quite prophetic.
That's chilling.
Yeah, it's chilling, but
along with your drumming career, which was also the same way. You were a trailblazer in many, many areas for sure.
I'm not sure about that, but
no, I am. And you studied with Murray Spivak for a period of time too, right?
I did. I had probably half a dozen, maybe more, lessons with Murray on my first ever visit to the US.
What's the main thing that you can impart on young drummers who are getting started in terms of the importance of getting not only a good foundation, but private instruction?
Well, we all need guidance, because it's quite possible, there's so much conflicting information out there that you may lose your way. And it's a very big topic to discuss, because how do you know who's going to instruct you with the best possible information? Yes, important to take lessons, to listen to someone who perhaps has more experience and some insight. I truly believe there's good and bad information out there, like everything. And how do you sort through it? Well, it's just by being diligent, by being proactive, by taking information, by discerning it, by being critical of it. Maybe not being loyal. Don't think that because your local drum teacher is your drum teacher, that he's the guy you have to be loyal to for a lifetime, because he might be feeding you some detail that is actually not right. So perhaps get experience, check out a few different teachers, see what they have to say, and then you can form judgment. Something, you can be critical within yourself, depending on your needs and how you want to play. But the good news is that there's so much information at your disposal now, as opposed to when we were growing up.
Sure.
There was very little information.
One thing that has always been a mantra of mine in developing the lessons on Drum Channel, there's all the great drummers today showing you what they're doing, but then I really wanted to have a catalog, a vault of the premier educators who taught the drummers that are of this generation, our generation, even the generation before, the Murray Spivaks, if you will, the Freddie Grubers. In your early childhood, because you started playing drums at a very early age, they might not know that story. Maybe a quick update about your basic history.
Oh, well, okay. I come from a musical family. My father was a keyboard player and my mother was a vocalist, and they always had band rehearsals around the house. I grew up with them, always being interested and wanting to partake, or at least sitting in the corner in the room while they were rehearsing, and I was very very obsessed with drums, and I would just keep my eyes focused on the drummer. So at age, just before I turned 3, they bought my first small drum kit. And I started playing immediately with my father. He took me out to do shows, like solo spots with him, just duets and etc. And so I started getting experience on stage very young. And one thing led to another. All of a sudden I was a young teenager already playing rock, gigs, all kinds of club gigs, and eventually joined a rock band but I was always simultaneously interested in other styles of music. In the 70s, the fusion scene happened. I went back and listened to all the Miles stuff and Philly Joe Jones, and eventually had lessons with Philly. Another story, on my first trip to the US when I was 19, that was quite an experience. And that's probably as concise as I can make it. The early days.
Yeah. Going back to what you talked about just a couple of minutes ago, thinking about you wouldn't say this, but I would say almost mastery of the instrument, because nobody ever feels like they've mastered the drum set, but certainly you've taken it to a level where the fundamental foundation you got is allowed you to take your technique to these unbelievable levels. And that's where I think you're saying if you don't get that right foundation, you can spend a lot of hours practicing, but you hit a wall. Yeah. There's certain basic things that you have to understand about how to follow and motivate the bounce of the stick, which you do so well in the traditional grip, which is what felt most comfortable to you and certainly works, and you can do everything. There's the mantra that some things you can't do. I have another thinking about jazz too. I want to get on this in a second, but thinking about what you can do with traditional and what you can do with matched, and maybe you could do something better with one as opposed to the other. But you're completely comfortable with the traditional grip, right? Yeah.
Well, I think with me it was perhaps a bit of a stubbornness and an obsession, which worked in my favor. Like, I refused to give in to the limitations of traditional grip, because there are some limitations. And one of them is powerful backbeats, and how can you play rock drums with traditional grip? And you'll see even some great drummers, traditional grip players, who always flip the stick over to play, heavier styles. And I refused to do that. I thought, I just grew up playing rock bands and just going home for I remember the first 6 months that I played in a rock band back when I was 16 years old. I had blisters all over my fingers, but I just kept playing and playing, and then within 1 year I had it down. No more blisters. I had some calluses, which have become very subtle now over the years, almost non-existent, and never had a problem with that again, and just worked on developing that touch and feel, finding that sweet spot. All the very intangible things that you can't even teach, really. It just comes from a concerted effort of practicing with focus, looking into every detail, every nuance of your strokes, and the evenness and the arc, the radius of the stick is flowing. Is it straight and even? Are you losing control? Does it get bouncy? There's all these things that you work on. That's why we say, work on stick control, work on rudiments. And apart from hand-to-hand coordination, it also teaches you this touch and feel on the instrument, which you can only get through years of playing with the right approach, of course.
It's interesting. Even sitting there as you're doing it, it looks so comfortable. It looks so right, I would say, just the natural flow that you have, because there are arcs going on, and it is a lot of martial arts involved in terms of the body motion, I think.
And as Philly Joe would say, ballet. He said, think of it like ballet, just power. There's so much power on that stage, those dancers, but there's grace and beauty. It's not always aggressive. There's a bit of underlying aggression, but there's beauty. There's flow, and there are curves, and so that's the way I think of drumming.
And a karate master can break a brick with that same stroke that you're making in the left hand. So there's a lot of power there if you utilize your body correctly.
Yeah, and the, you know, one of the things about touch and feel is that it doesn't necessarily have to look like you're breaking a brick, but you can have a lot of power, but just with the right sensitivity and the right touch, it looks effortless. And it feels effortless, you know.
What about learning other instruments? I know you played keyboard proficiently at an early age.
I have my father to thank for my keyboard skills. He insisted that I learn. He wanted me to be a pianist. So when I was young, simultaneously with starting drum lessons, I also started piano lessons. And I used to practice both for years, you know, divide my time. And then it got to a point where gradually drums took over, and
so was there that
more and more time. And
was there that seminal moment that I've seen a lot of drummers explain, where this happened and I knew I wanted to play drums? I saw this person, I heard this record, No,
I was too young for that. Like I said, I was 2 years old when I had a little toy drum, and I'd sit there with my parents rehearsing and tap along or whatever, you know. And I just had this innate feeling to play rhythm, and they just bought me a drum kit, and I never thought about it after that. Never thought about what I would do. It was drums.
So at what point, when fusion coming in, obviously that meant more technique in order to play with people that you were aspiring to. Who were some of your favorite drummers back in the 70s? That era.
Okay. Well, I was the first. I joined a record club. Of course, we were still dealing with vinyl then, and we're going back to
I remember record clubs.
Remember record clubs? Okay.
You get one a month?
Yeah, you had to buy at least one a month. Subscription, like we do subscriptions now.
Yep.
And online subscriptions a little different, but still it was great, because I would always order a lot of records. But for some of the special import, I had to go to the import store in downtown Melbourne. I remember it was in McKillop Lane, great store. It was like a chapel to me. It was religion. I'd walk in there and you'd see all these new vinyls, the latest releases from, you know, Return to Forever, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Weather Report, all those iconic 70s fusion heroes, and then Billy Cobham, you know.
I knew that name was going to come up, right?
Well, I mean, you know, because he was probably, I mean, I'm just kind of guessing here, but he was one of the sidemen, him and perhaps Stanley Clarke, who were the guys from the bands like Mahavishnu and Return Forever, who started also this great output of solo records.
Sure.
On the side, and great records. And so that's how, you know, just one thing after another, I just kept buying those records. But just before that, from the record club, I would buy a lot of rock and progressive rock. So I was listening to a lot of Deep Purple in their heyday. Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There were a lot of other bands, but so it was kind of a combination of rock and fusion, and then I started buying all the Blue Note records, you know, Alvin. I loved all the Miles records with Philly Joe and then Tony, you know, Nefertiti, one of the classics, and the old Smokin' records with Philly. And I fell in love with Philly because I just loved his lyrical playing. It was just so classy and just so clean and so articulate, you know. It was lovely.
So there was a period, my Philly story, as told to me by Freddie Gruber, who was in New York with him back in those days, and would hang out with that group of players, was that there's the earlier Miles things that he did, and then there was about a year and a half that he almost took off out of the scene. And the story that Freddie told me is that he had seen Buddy Rich, and his comment was he wasn't looking to play like Buddy Rich played, but he wanted to have the technique that he had. So he kind of went almost underground and just practiced literally for almost a year solid. And it is interesting when you listen to some of the earlier Miles and then just the later ones, just before Jimmy Cobb came in, you could hear when he would do his solos, there would be a little more technique involved in it than what he had before. But
that's an interesting story. Yeah. But obviously I hung out a lot with Philly because I had lessons with him and hung out in New York at some of his gigs. And
that had to be an experience.
Oh, it was. I have some stories. We can say that for another time. But
I don't even know if we can tell them, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah, we can.
Okay.
They're okay, but they can be quite lengthy. But he was a wonderful guy. He was living in Philadelphia, and I was living in New York. I was 19, 20. I just moved for the first time, spent some time here, and he would pick me up from the station.
Wow.
So I'd tell him, well, I've got to come from New York. He said, yeah, no problem. I'll pick you up, from the station. And there he was in his big, I don't know what he had, big Cadillac, huge, waiting in the car for me. He'd get off. He told me which station to get off. And
oh, great.
He'd drive me home. And then he'd drive me back to the station. He was fantastic. What a lovely guy. But maybe that 1.5 years hiatus coincided. He did tell me a story about him having to go and live in London for a period of around that much. I'm sure it was around a year or two, he said.
Yeah.
I wonder if that coincided.
I probably did.
He wrote the Brushes book, and he practiced, and
that
could be. And he did tell me the reason, and it won't come to me right now, but I may have it on my cassette tapes that I actually recorded the lessons on. I'm going to have to digitize those, and maybe we can make it some special download.
Absolutely, that would be thrilling for sure. And this is history we're talking about.
Oh, this is amazing that I've still got those tapes, and I really need to transfer them before they oxidize.
Well, that answers a question that I think I already had answered in my mind. But in hearing you play, whatever style you're playing, it really swings. And I think that's important for young drummers to understand. It kind of is maybe the difference between being a great drummer and being a great musician. But swing has a connotation of grandpa's music or jazz, but any good music, any good drummer who's in a band, whatever you're playing, you need to make that band come alive is another way to put it. But we're trying to use the word jazz more as a genre as opposed to a style of music. So
you're saying you're using swing not as a musical style, but as another, like an interchangeable term with groove or all those, like I said, intangibles of music that. How do you discuss it? How do you analyze these things? How do you put words? How do you categorize them?
Believe me, I'm trying on Drum Channel all day and all night, and those are the mysterious things that's why I often say a lot of the interviews that we have on the site with bands, listening to themselves play, trying to prod them on why did you do this when you were there? Why did you do that when you were there? It's like, well, I followed the bass player. Things that you learn by the school of hard knocks usually. If you're a young musician getting going. When I interviewed Mick Fleetwood recently, I talked about pocket. It's like I would thought he just grew up and it was just a natural thing, because how could you have that type of a time feel without that? And he told a riveting story when I asked him the question. He says, "Oh, you just reminded me of something." I was with a young band, blues band, as a house band at a club, I believe it said Chicago, and for the first time they had a major blues artist come in. I forget the name, and they were going to be the backing band. So now they were actually backing a major artist, and within the first tune, the guy turned around and just reamed everybody in the band. It's like they were the hot band in town at that level.
Right.
To be the best band in your neighborhood is one thing. To have the level of musicianship you need to be a worldwide famous artist. And it was a learning experience. You're not watching me, you're not following my movements, the time, you're not picking up the grooves. Not that it was anything that bad, but it was, and probably not noticeable by the average person coming in, but it was the difference between what you're talking about. Just, the subtlety that makes something really, kind of come alive. But
yeah, and actually you bring up another point there, talking about listening and hearing is the development of the ear. Another thing to realize is that, really high-level pro drummers who have practiced and trained for years to develop their sense of rhythm, their understanding, their precision, their understanding of the relationship between, having to play with a click track and rhythm, and you start to develop a very, sensitive ear. And I did years of transcribing, and before there were easy tools to do that with, and so you develop your ear, you develop a sensitivity which is beyond what a normal person can hear or sense in music, or a young, inexperienced player. You may think that what you're hearing is the truth, but you've still got years of developing and really fine-tuning what you hear, how you hear it. And you'll realize down the road as you get older, oh my God, now I understand that. I understand what's going on. Or, like I'm very sensitive when I hear recordings of something. I can hear any little discrepancy, especially now that we live in an age where so many things have to be done fairly meticulously in terms of the way we record, so
yeah.
It's another way of hearing things, but it really takes your hearing to that next level. And so the more you work on rhythm, understanding all the smaller units, the in-between beats, all the small rests, and striking, and not squeezing and contracting and expanding gaps in between notes too drastically. Of course, there's a bit of that. That's what our feel is. There's always that going on. You can't be robotic,
Even when playing with a click track.
Engineers can, in certain genres of music, intentionally do that to your playing because that's the style of music, You listen to a lot of heavy metal, double bass drum, that is all quantized. If anyone can play like that acoustically here right now, please come and do it, because what I'm hearing on record is not that, but that's fine. That is a genre. That's the sound they want. That's the sound they've created. But there are nuances in our playing, and that's what creates our feel. Can you imagine the amount of variation from one drummer to another? The way they place their beats and their notes, if you were to analyze it.
That's the difference. I think I would say the same thing about you that I'd say about Buddy Rich. I mean, you have a phenomenal amount of technique. If you took Buddy's technique away, we would still be talking about him as a great big band drummer.
Yeah.
Because he knew how to play a band, whether he played it the way he did in terms of his intensity of where he put the time, or how many notes he put into a figure or fill or a single stroke roll. That's the drummer's contribution to the music, but his main job isn't that. No. His main job is what we're talking about doing. I interviewed recently Senior Abe Jr. When they were in here with Greg Matheson in the band, and I was going around the horn, and my question was about musicianship, just what we're talking about, and Abe Senior said, "Musicians are professional listeners. That's our job." So it's like, forget the instrument you're playing, but you have to be a professional listener to listen to what's going on, in the band. And if recent band that came out here, we were discussing the immediate family, all these legendary musicians, and they answered the question the same way when I asked it to Hal Blaine, like what's the most important thing you need when you're going into a studio? What's the thing that you look for first when you've hired you, you're there, they're about to ready to do the song, Do you think you'd want to know the beat, the tempo? Is it a groove? Is it funky? Is it what else? And he said, no, the first thing I want to know is the lyrics. And that kind of blew me away. It wasn't something I would have thought of, He then said the hardest thing about working in the studio is finding a parking spot. So, Hal's got but musically to take that approach, to it. When you're composing, we're thinking of a drum solo right now and putting a drum solo together. This subject's come up with a lot of emails we've been getting recently because we're putting some things on how a drummer can orchestrate a solo. Any tips on a beginning, a middle, an end that you could give somebody for structuring a solo together?
Not really. And here's why. Because a solo is an expression of your immediate feelings, and you can only produce what you've worked on up to this point to have that skill to spontaneously express an idea. And that's all it is. You've got to keep doing all the hard yards, all the hard work to develop your sense of rhythm, as we spoke about, develop your ability to execute what you hear, to play all kinds of, independence, variations in the way you practice. Even if you're practicing a rudiment, think of other ways of phrasing it. Just if you don't have that ability, no advice on soloing is going to help you. You can't just magically show up and play this amazing drum solo. That all comes from a spring of knowledge and of things that ideas you've accumulated and skills over the years to how proficiently you can do that. That's the only advice I can give. You just work on anything, grooves, variations of grooves, come up with interesting patterns that you create yourself and learn ways to manipulate them, to layer things, to play variations of them, switch the beat on them. And there's all kinds of techniques. And that's how you develop your palette, your inventory of options.
Brilliant thing you just said, which I just want to reiterate. Execute what you hear. Have the ability to execute what you hear. It's not the same thing as play something that you worked on a little bit earlier. Executing what you're hearing is being in the moment and being able to produce whatever you, as if you were singing it and you were a vocalist. And when you study with Murray Spivak, we have a lot of lessons on the site that are to basically build the foundation of how you would play. And then the hard thing on having a website where you're not there with the person is you're not there with the person to say, that's right, but try it this way, or putting a little icing on the cake. But I hope they glean that from hearing us talking a lot. But when you study for Murray Spivak, I assume you didn't take what you studied in that lesson and have it affect what you played that night. I mean, it wasn't like I learned to play this great thing. It was explain a little bit about the importance of the fundamentals of learning how your body works, because that was another big premise with Freddie Gruber. You are the instrument. This produces the sound. This is the bell of the horn, but the complicated thing that makes the music come out is the way you use your body.
It all comes down to many of the things that I've already previously mentioned today, and that is, we spoke about touch and the nuance and going into detail. So by studying these different methods, you're getting the mechanical basics of how to construct. How do you get there? What is it that's going to allow you to have good touch and perhaps a certain approach to your fulcrum and the way you hold sticks. So that's the starting point. And then you've got to take it from there. Once you have that skill set, you move forward. So I think people like Freddie Gruber and Murray offer the basic mechanics of how do you build that foundation? Where do you start? Now, having said that, I might be a little controversial here, but because I've experienced and I've sourced all this information, I came to my own conclusions. For me, the Murray and Freddie approach does not work, and I persevered with it. I studied it, I did it, and then I took another approach. I studied or went down some other paths and found the way to do it, which strangely enough was back to the way I originally started playing before I had those lessons. So, this is a journey.
Yeah, it's personal, yeah.
You're going to speak to, to guys, to Chad and perhaps, Dave Weckl, who loves, the whole Gruber method, and they'll talk to you for days about why they think it's a good thing. But there are options, like I'm saying. There's not one way. That's why I said to you earlier, have lessons from different people. See what you learn from all of them.
People looking at how you do what you're doing, and with the new player we have on the website, you can slow anything down. So seeing it in slow motion is a lesson as to what's actually happening with your body. And
oh, you can do that now.
Yeah, anything we can.
I need to look at that. Review some things.
Anything we have on Drum Channel, you can now slow down for sure. So, well, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I know you have a really busy day here today. We kind of imposed before you even got finished with setting up the set. But I'd like to see a little bit more about what you have going on there. I'll grab my iPhone when we finish and do that.
Fantastic. Yeah, sure. I'd love to look. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
This is your home. This is your home away from home. So we have to be correct now. Come on. We can't just finish up here. We have to show people that as we end up, we're going to be right back to where we started.
Got to put on my piggy mask again.
So there you go.
Yes. All right.
Check out everything you've got going where? Where can they find out on your website to get the projects that
my website, my Instagram.
Which is?
Well, my website is virgildonati.com.
That's the one I want.
Very simple,
right?
and you can get to everything else from there.
There you go.
I've got a Twitter feed running live on the side. Instagram, there's always cool updates, the latest clips. And please check out my web store, which you can access through my website. I've got some very cool T-shirts, including this one actually.
Hey, it is very cool. You're right.
Just one of my favorites, a very good friend of mine, is a great animator. Used to animate for Mad Magazine.
Ah, sure.
And he's done a great animated DW kit with arms and faces and me playing it, torturing the kit, and that's on a T-shirt now. That's on the merch store, so check out my website.
And check out Virgil. If you're a young drummer out there and you're not that familiar with his playing, or all the people that you've talked about that you aspired to and listened to, that all has to do with the lineage, which is so very, very, very important. One of the greatest drummers in the world, Virgil. I can't thank you enough for being here with us. And look forward to getting together with you next time. If we can come up with a way to stop fogging up your glasses when you wear these masks, we'll have a whole new invention too. I'll let you know what we come up with. Thank you, everybody, for following us here. Let's have a virtual goodbye. Thank you. Oh, we can do it. Yeah, hey, there you go.
Right.
See you next time.